Okay. Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us for what is an exciting launch of the Institute's monthly members webinar. This is a series of webinars that we are kicking off today, and we're excited to host our very esteemed member, the UK government, for them to make an announcement on, or a presentation rather, on the new funding announcement. Going forward, this series of webinars will be exclusive to the Institute's members only. So do make the most of this occasion, and I hope you very much enjoy the presentations ahead. Next slide, please. So my name is Dominic Rasool. I am part of the Global CCS Institute. We are an international think tank with a clear mission to accelerate the deployment of CCS globally. We're a member-based organization backed by over 200 members that include NGOs, governments, and businesses. And we are joined today by representatives from the UK government who will be presenting the UK's, as I said, new funding announcement on CCUS. Mark Woods is the CCUS Track 1 planner at the UK Department for Energy Security and Net Zero, and Rhiann Lees is the CCUS sector manager at the UK Department for Business and Trade. What you see in front of you is just a quick bit of housekeeping for your attention regarding the possibility for you to share some questions that you may have for Rhiann and Mark, and they shall do their best to answer these in the time allocated for this event. And without much further ado, I shall now hand over to Mark Woods for his presentation, and Mark will then hand over to Rhiann. And after Rhiann's presentation, we'll take some time for some Q&A. Mark, thank you for joining us, and over to you.
Tom, thanks very much. Can I just check that I'm coming through okay?
You are, certainly, sir. Thank you.
Great. Thank you very much. Could I have the next slide, please? So good afternoon, everyone. My name is Mark Woods, and I work at the Department for Energy Security Net Zero as a project manager within the CCS program, and that's carbon capture, utilisation and storage as it's known in UK government. So I'm delighted to present to you an overview of CCS in the UK, particularly in the context of the recent announcements on funding for UK CCS last month. I've worked predominantly on Track 1 clusters, so namely the East Coast cluster in the northeast and HyNet in the northwest. And these are the clusters most pertinent to the announcements. Just to make sure that everyone is following, when we refer to a Track 1 cluster, we're referring to a transport and storage entity, so a CO2 transport and storage entity, to which users or emitters will connect. I'll assume that there's a mixed level of understanding on the call, so I'll briefly cover why we need CCS and the UK cluster system before going into a bit more detail on what the announcements mean for our CCS programme, as well as some future targets. So CCS is essential for targeting hard to abate sectors, and that refers to those industrial sectors where emissions are particularly challenging to reduce, such as steel production, cement production, or dispatchable power. The UK's Independent Climate Change Committee estimates that we may need the capacity to capture and store up to 176 million tonnes of CO2 per year by 2050. So this makes CCUS a necessity, not an option, to meet our net zero targets. On the timeline, you can see some of the UK's broad net zero targets, including the legally binding target of 78% emissions reduction by 2035, and that's from the 1990 date. You'll also notice the announcement date in October 4th, 2024, when the Prime Minister, the Chancellor, and our Secretary of State, Ed Miliband, announced that we have reached commercial agreements with our Track 1 anchor projects and funding of up to £21.7 billion to launch CCUS in the UK. This was a huge announcement to make and came within the administration's first 100 days in office. It has provided substantial confidence to the wider industry that the development of this technology has the full backing of the government for up to a period of 25 years. Some of you may recall or be aware that the previous administration had announced £20 billion of funding for CCS, and that was back in March 2023. But the difference was that that was a pre-negotiations figure. So we've now finalized a lot of those commercial terms, and we hope that those projects will reach financial close in the coming months and then start the construction phase. So it's a massive step forward. Furthermore, the UK government has set out clear ambitions to deliver clean power by 2030. It marks the delivery date for one of the government's 5 missions to make Britain a clean energy superpower. CCS, of course, has an important role to play in this. So phase 1 of the cluster sequencing process has been open to cluster organizations located in the UK, capable of deploying by 2030 and meeting the definition of a CCUS cluster. Our ambition is to deploy CCUS at scale in 2 of the UK's industrial clusters by the mid-2020s, and a further 2 by 2030, capturing 20 to 30 million tonnes of CO2 per year. This phase is characterised by substantial government intervention to break down market barriers that could otherwise be a blocker to establishing a conducive market framework for CCUS networks to develop. Essentially, this government support has had to incentivise the private sector to invest by helping to create a model that will provide a suitable enough rate of return for that investment. And just another couple of things to point out that will help that. The UK emissions trading scheme implemented in 2021 promotes cost-effective decarbonisation, allowing business to cut carbon emissions where it's cheapest to do so. Additionally, the carbon border adjustment mechanism, expected to be implemented in 2027, will place a carbon price on some of the most emissions-intensive industrial goods imported to the UK. So these are the kind of things that over time will make it more expensive to emit CO2 than to adopt carbon capture. Slide, please. The UK cluster system takes advantage of geographical opportunities for CCUS implementation, specifically the assessed storage capacity in the North Sea that is available to us. So as you can see from the graphic, both Track 1 clusters are shown, along with a subset of the projects that were initially selected to negotiate deals with the government. These projects represent those that are part of the funding envelope that have received approval from the government last month, 2 months ago now. And it is within this funding envelope that we can now agree and sign contracts. By reaching funding agreement, it is shown that the commercial terms that make up the business models are bankable. Furthermore, that the risk share has proven to be acceptable for all parties. There's been support for the insurance market, which has had to essentially develop a new product to sit at the front, at the point of comfort, with the government providing that extra level of security to account for high impact, low probability risk. Net Zero Teesside is a dispatchable power plant and will be the commissioning emitter for the East Coast Cluster network in the Northeast. This type of project is a first of a kind and an essential contributor to the domestic energy mix when renewable sources of energy like wind and solar cannot meet demand. On the HyNet side, Protos is an industrialized carbon capture energy from waste plant, and EETH is a CCUS-enabled hydrogen production facility, both of which are projects in the advanced stage of negotiations within the HyNet cluster. These 3 types of emitter provide an insight into the range of industrial partners that the government will continue to engage with to develop CCUS network. Each type of project has a different funding mechanism, whether capital grants, levy funding, or exchequer funding. There are further projects that are in the same negotiation stage in Track 1, but the decision was made earlier on to sign contracts with projects as and when they were ready, both to bring renewed confidence to industry and to be able to realise benefits earlier. whilst the funding allocation specifies the projects mentioned here, there's no guarantee that all of them will progress to deal signing stage, as there are several contractual steps that are still outstanding. In a similar vein, the strategic context in which the programme received funding allocation is predicated on further projects connecting to these two networks over time, and to future clusters further down the line. This will, of course, enhance the benefits realised by the two clusters and enhance the value for money case. So there's still flexibility to ensure that future deals are competitive. Officials have continued to engage with Track 2 clusters, including Acorn in Scotland and Viking in the Humber region, to understand their plans. Following the announcement in October, further funding decisions for Track 2 clusters will be taken as part of the spending review that will be conducted in late spring 2025. Next slide, please. So the UK is an early mover for CCS decarbonisation hubs, with ambitious plans to lead the global deployment and development of carbon capture technologies. International collaboration is crucial for advancing CCS technology. We aim to support the establishment of CCS clusters in the UK, adding up to 5 billion to the economy by 2050 and supporting 50,000 jobs in the long term. Our efforts are not just confined to the UK. We are actively collaborating with international partners to accelerate CCS deployment worldwide. Through extensive collaboration with industry, we believe we've designed a set of business models that provide the right incentives to implement CCS at scale, that demonstrate good value for money for the use of public funds, given the proportional share of risk across public and private sector, along with a robust regulatory regime. The vast majority of support is delivered at operations rather than via grants for construction. So there is a strong incentive for the private sector to reach the operational stage on time and balances the requirement for lifetime support with keeping costs down. This is where the UK model might differ from some other countries where significant grants for construction are more typical. And it shows where we can add further value to the international development of CCS through our experience of developing these mechanisms and the regulatory regime. I mentioned phase 1 above, out to 2030, and the ambition for capturing 20 to 30 megatons per year. Beyond 2030, there will be a transition towards a more market-led, self-sustaining model where government support will be reduced over time. We have made substantial progress, and this announcement is a huge milestone for us. There are over 90 CCS projects currently underway across the UK, covering dispatchable power, low carbon hydrogen, greenhouse gas removals, industrial and waste management. Our CCS supply chain strategy developed by industry through the CCS Council sets out commitments to share best practice and track progress against supply chains. That brings me to the end of my formal presentation. I think we might get onto some questions later, but first I will hand over to Rianne.
Thanks very much, Mark, and hi everyone. Go next slide, please. Thanks. So yeah, I'm Rianne Lees. I'm the CCS Sector Manager at the UK's Department for Business and Trade. So firstly, a little about my role and what my team does. I sit in the hydrogen and CCS sector team at DBT, and it's our role to drive growth in these sectors. I lead on CCS, and driving growth for CCS involves promoting the sector, highlighting investment opportunities, and working very closely with our colleagues at the Department for Energy Security and Net Zero to help influence policy so that it maximises growth. We also help companies with exports, and we can connect them to a range of tools and insights across the department to help them achieve their goals. Next slide, please. So you've heard from Mark how we are deploying CCS in the UK, and we at DBT see a really important role for private investment. And this slide just summarises just a few of the reasons why the UK is a prime destination for that. We have generous funding flows across the CCS supply chain, like the 21.7 billion mark mentioned earlier for the first Track 1 projects in HyNet and the East Coast Cluster. This was a historic moment for industry and really demonstrates the UK's government commitment to carbon capture. We also have a new National Wealth Fund with 5.8 billion of funding for key sectors, including carbon capture and hydrogen. I think it's also helpful to briefly highlight the CCS vision, which outlines the UK's blueprint for the transition to an industry-led CCS sector. A CCS sector which relies on government subsidies, whilst it's necessary to kickstart the sector, it isn't really sustainable. And what we want to see is a self-sustaining market in the future, one that drives down costs, is backed by private investment and reduces the need for government support. Next slide, please. So we have a range of support available to help businesses, as well as generous funding flows across the CCS supply chain designed to overcome commercial barriers. For example, in the UK, we can offer capital investment allowances, UK export finance loans, a new National Wealth Fund, as I mentioned earlier, that will bring together key institutions and a compelling proposition for investors to help mobilise billions more in private investment. We also have British Business Bank, the newly established Great British Energy, which will develop partnerships with the private sector to help speed up the deployment of new clean energy projects, as well as dedicated business models for CCS designed to address commercial barriers to investment through world-leading frameworks, capital and revenue funding. This includes business models for industrial carbon capture, power BECCS, CCS transport and storage systems, hydrogen production and others. Again, I think all these packages of support really demonstrate the commitment from government to support CCS businesses in the UK. We really do want to see CCS industry thrive here. Next slide, please. So we know funding has already been allocated to Track 1 clusters, and our Track 2 clusters have been confirmed as Viking and Acorn. But what about the opportunities beyond that? So the UK has ambitions to establish a fleet of CCS clusters across the UK, and this slide highlights just a few examples of these. So we have the Bacton cluster on the Norfolk coast, which will be a crucial CCS and hydrogen hub in East England, the Morecambe cluster in Northwest England, which aims to be one of the biggest carbon storage and hydrogen production clusters in the UK, as well as the South Wales industrial cluster, which will play a major role in decarbonising industrial areas in Wales. So as we transition to a self-sustaining market, we'll need more partnerships and more private investment for projects like these, and we really look forward to working with industry on this. Next slide, please. So I think Mark stole my thunder a bit with this slide, so I'm sorry if we're repeating a little. But yeah, moving on to the capture projects, there are over 90 CCS projects already in the pipeline in the UK, as Mark mentioned. I think what we often hear from investors is that they really value the UK's clear vision for CCS and the clarity of our business models. And I think the number of CCS projects already in the pipeline really demonstrates that confidence in the UK market. So here are just a few examples of the first projects that are already underway and that are part of our Track 1 clusters. We've got EET Hydrogen HyNet, which will be one of the first large-scale low-carbon hydrogen production hubs in the world. And as Mark mentioned earlier, we also have Net Zero Teesside Power, which is in the East Coast cluster. And this will be the UK's first-of-a-kind gas-fired power station with CCS providing crucial energy security. Also, I think it's just helpful to highlight that the map on this slide, it was taken from the CCSA website. So if you go on their website, you can find an interactive project map where you can see all the projects in development in the UK, as well as the developers. So I'd really encourage you to check this out if you're interested in getting involved in any specific projects. Next slide, please. So moving on to supply chains. For us at DBT, supply chains are particularly important. The UK has a proud industrial heritage and a world-leading engineering, business and financial environment. We want to build on this expertise and knowledge to ensure that we develop strong and competitive UK supply chains. So we've worked really closely with our colleagues at the Department for Energy, Security and Net Zero to understand the gaps, and we've identified high-value opportunities in areas such as column vessel manufacturing, process controls and packaged CCS provision, amongst others. And with a large pipeline of projects in the UK, we think there's a really great opportunity for companies to come and invest in the supply chain here, grow their business and then export to other markets as other countries look to decarbonise. Next slide, please. So being in the UK also means you can tap into our world-leading expertise and innovation through multiple institutions and organisations that are dedicated to advancing CCS. For example, we're home to the CCSA, Europe's leading carbon capture and storage association. They play a really important role in supporting CCS industry in the UK and across Europe. We also have leading institutions and universities such as Imperial College London and the UK CCS Research Centre. These institutions foster collaboration amongst academics, industry, regulators and others to advance CCS technology and innovation. So yeah, if R&D is something that you are looking for, please do get in touch and we'd be happy to connect you to some of these great institutions. Next slide, please. So finally, just to mention, at DBT, we have a team of dedicated investment professionals that are here to support businesses on their investment journey. So we have teams that can support with market insight, finding partners, helping you find co-financing, supporting with advocacy and aftercare. We really want to see CCS companies invest and thrive in the UK, and we're here to support throughout that journey and to help them achieve their goals. Next slide, please. So yeah, that brings me to the end of my very brief presentation, but I think just to quickly summarise, we're a really pivotal and exciting time for CCS in the UK. We have a new government that has demonstrated its commitment to the sector with a record-breaking investment announced in October. And this is really just the beginning, with next steps due to be confirmed at next year's spending review. As I said earlier, we really want to see a thriving CCS sector in the UK with more clusters. And for that, we'll need more partnerships of industry and more investment. And we see opportunities across the CCS value chain for businesses to get involved. So yeah, if you have any questions, I know we've got a brief Q&A, but if we run out of time, please feel free to drop me an email or find me on LinkedIn if you want to find out more. Yeah, thank you very much for listening.
Thank you very much, Rianne, and thank you so much, Mark, as well, for both of your presentations. I think these were really insightful. We've got a couple of questions that have come through from the audience, and I'll start by directing a couple of them over to Mark. I think would be best positioned for these. Mark, what engagement does the government have after deals are signed with the first projects? That's the first question. And the second one is, how will government support change over time? So if you could tackle that first one and the second one, and then I'll look at who can answer the next two. Thanks.
Great. Thank you, Dom. So first one, what engagement does government have after deals are signed? By deals, yeah, so essentially we've had the announcements, and that gives us the go-ahead to sign deals, or final investment decision is another way that it's known. Essentially, when that happens, the construction phase begins. The department and regulators will oversee that phase. So Ofgem, the Office of Gas and Electricity Markets, will be responsible for governing the economic license, which is granted to the transport and storage company at the point of contract signature. Ofgem was bestowed these powers under the Energy Act. They will be the main arbiter should there be any requirements to change the license during that phase. And they will also enforce rules around the network code going forward, which is the agreement between the transport and storage company and the users. Ofgem will also have increased involvement in selecting and awarding licenses to future transport and storage companies as the transition to a more market-led industry takes place. We also have LCCC involved, so the Low Carbon Contracts Company, and they've been designated as counterparty for the revenue support contracts for the transport and storage companies and for users. And they will ensure the business models are operationalized and allow the industrial partners to receive that appropriate rate of return should they fulfill all their contractual obligations. And so between the regulators and DESNZ, we'll monitor and track progress of both construction and spend. DESNZ in particular will step in to help manage any sort of big cross-chain risk where the role of the regulator does not provide sufficient power effectively, where the risks relating to one party's performance, whether fault-based or due to external factors, impact on others in the value chain. DESNZ will also track overall cost and benefits, both in terms of sort of actual and projection. So that's just, the main players on the sort of wider government side. And then the second question on government support over time. I mean, there's still quite a lot of uncertainty. I think both myself and Rian mentioned the spending review. So that obviously be a big moment to determine the next sort of round of sort of funding allocation. So I'll keep this one fairly brief, but the market transition will support the ambition of creating a self-sustaining market, largely industry-led, and will require less government support than it will presently. Between 2030 and 2035 is where the transition will become more evident. I mentioned the 2035 date for our legally binding target for carbon budget 6. And by that stage, we'll need to increase CO2 stored by 50 megatons per annum. And then we'll look at further technological advancement and policy that will be required potentially for roles for non-pipeline transport of CO2. And Rian's talked about some of the funding to help sort of bring that to life. I probably stop there and give a chance for a couple more.
Yeah, I think that's really helpful. Thanks a lot for that, Mark. Very interesting. Okay, so I've got a couple more. Just to be fair, I'll direct these to Rian. I hope that's okay for you, Rian. The first one is, how does the UK's CCUS investment climate compare to other countries at the moment?
Thanks, Dominic. Good question. As Mark and I mentioned, I think the UK has committed obviously a huge amount of money to the first 2 CCS clusters, and I don't think it can be understated how monumental this investment is. We've also named two track 2 clusters, invited bids for track 1 expansion. I appreciate that calls for us to move even faster and to confirm funding for the next stage, and we totally understand the need to move quickly on this, and next steps will be confirmed following next year's spending review. But what I think is really great about the UK is that there is a cross-party support across the major political parties about CCUS and on tackling climate change and meeting net zero. The programme has successfully spanned 2 different governments, and if we compare that to some of the major Western economies at the moment where there's a lot more uncertainty, such as snap elections or recently elected climate sceptical administrations, I think what we hear from investors is that our stability and our cross-party consensus on CCUS is very attractive considering the current global context. I think whatever happens politically in the UK, we see the necessity of CCUS to meeting net zero. And I think that puts us in a really great position to become a global leader in CCUS. Thanks.
Very helpful. I think we've got time for one more question. International flows of CO2 could play an important role in unlocking investment in UK CCS projects. Is this recognised by the UK government? Rian?
Thanks. I think, the short answer is yes. We see a really strong opportunity to collaborate, particularly with the EU on CCUS. I think our early mover status, comparative regulatory regimes and our extensive offshore experience means that we can be a really valuable partner to the EU. I think sharing best practice will be really key to getting projects up and running, and establishing cross-border CO2 networks could offer better value for money solutions both for the UK and the EU. It could also provide greater capacity, redundancy and healthy competition. We're obviously aware that of the current legislative and regulatory barriers that will need to be addressed, such as ETS and London Protocol, and we're seeking to discuss these with the Commission and with the relevant member states. Also really keen to work with industry and to further understand the benefits of cross-border CO2 networks, the barriers and how we can collectively address them. that just made me think. I think today CCA have launched a report on the benefits of establishing a Europe-wide CCS market. So yeah, I'd really recommend taking a look at that if that's of interest to anyone on this call. Yeah, thanks.
Okay, great. Yeah, that's very helpful, Rianne. Thank you. Well, I think we are reaching sort of the end of time allocated for this webinar. So I'm going to wrap up by, first of all, thanking both of our presenters, Mark Woods and Rianne Lees. A massive thanks to both of you. And I think it's a very special time right now in CCS to have the UK government make such a commitment. And, you know, we're really looking forward to see how things evolve over here and how that influences perhaps other countries. It's always nice to see one country taking that big step. So good luck to you, and we look forward to being able to support you throughout this journey. So congratulations and many thanks. Just some additional words to those in the audience who are still with us. I'd like to say thank you for attending and paying attention, of course, and for all the questions. Unfortunately, we haven't had time to answer all of them today, and we can try and follow up you know, with you either by email. You can reach out to us, or we've made a note of the people who've sort of put down some questions that we didn't have a chance to answer, and we'll see how we can get back to you on those. But most of the questions I've seen today, a lot of them actually can be addressed just by going through the Institute's website, especially ones that sort of have to do with understanding CCS. As for this webinar and the series, this was our first one in this series. There'll be many more. We're trying to get a cadence of about a monthly cadence for releasing these webinars. And as you see on this slide, they're going to be covering 3 sort of general topics. So that's the advancements in capture technology, CCS and power generation, point source carbon markets. Of course, there will be others as we continue to evolve this. And we'll be announcing the dates on the members portal and by way of our newsletter and CCS highlights if you are subscribed. Next slide, please, Eleanor. And finally, of course, if you need to get to know a little bit more about the Institute and what we do, here are some helpful links to our website. This webinar will be recorded, or has been recorded, and it will be available for our members. So if you need more information, do take a look at the member portal or reach out to your account manager. So with that, I'd like to say thank you very much, and looking forward to the next one in January. Goodbye.